All right, welcome to the channel. And today, Father Vladimir joins me again. We're going to talk about an upcoming pilgrimage, Orthodox
Yes.
pilgrimage to Italy. Everybody thinks, why would you do Orthodox Italy? Isn't that Roman Catholic? Well, actually, there's a thousand years of Christianity that's Orthodox, we would say, in Italy prior to the schism. And a lot of these sites that we're going to be talking about, also, even the ones that are Roman Catholic, they still have an Orthodox history and lineage and Orthodox relics that we would be very interested to go and see. So, we're going to be talking about the history. We're going to be talking about some of the theology. We're going to talk about why this is a pilgrimage that you probably would like to go on if you want to have the time of your life. And who doesn't want to have the time of their life? Father Vladimir, thank you for coming back on.
Yeah. Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. This is a very exciting topic for me to share because this is something that can lead to a direct experience of meeting a lot of people that hopefully will join us in this trip. And this is something that is a very fascinating a topic that's not maybe explored by too many people from this angle of experience, first of all, and maybe historic angle. Um, we, as Jay pointed out, have some misconceptions of, or understandably, we have a very strongly built image of Italy as a Catholic country, which is absolutely true, has been a Catholic country for over 1,000 years. Well, 1,000 years, actually, if we count from the schism, slightly less than. But we have the other half of the glass that's half full, if you will, that we have the Orthodox history of Italy and Europe that kind of gotten sort of over painted, if you will.
So, yeah, there's a lot of history that we're going to kind of go over a little bit of that. But maybe before we get to the history and the theology, well, what's your connection to Italy? I know that you and I, we did a really long interview where we talked about, the influence of the Renaissance in St. Petersburg, and you deconstructed a lot of the architecture and the artwork. But that also relates to Florence, and you have a connection there in a background. So, because a lot of people have asked me, why is your priest doing Italy? Wouldn't everybody want to go to Athos? Wouldn't everybody want to go to, Russia? Why is it that you have a connection to Italy?
Yeah, I could. It's a little bit of my personal journey, my personal story in Christ, and perhaps I mean everybody's story in finding Christ, starting with apostles, is rather unique, and I think anybody could share some very amazing stories. But how I ended up in Italy, well, as you started saying, speaking of St. Petersburg, that we've covered somewhat in detail in one of our lectures, one of our interviews. I think I ended up in Italy first when I ended up in Hermitage Museum as a young teenager. And that's where my journey to Italy probably began, from the art, history, and cultural scenario. I think I ended up in Italy when I was born in St. Petersburg, to be more precise, Russia, because that city is built by overwhelming majority of Italian architects, and was an Hermitage collection as a huge number. Out of their million artifacts, more than half of them are Italian. And so those influences were kind of embedded in me. And, if you look at it from divine providence, I think our Lord led me to have a fascination and a kind of affinity for that Western European, and maybe even you could say Renaissance and Italian aesthetics in art and in architecture. And that's what led me to study art and architecture, starting from St. Petersburg. And then when I moved to America, I was still far from being you would say, a church-going Orthodox a Christian. I was still on the path of seeking. My faith was in the realm of exploring and looking for God, and eventually I will, fast forward, but in my later years, um, namely around 20 years ago or so, I was drawn to Florence for the reasons of art. I was very interested in studying art that was taught in the ways of the old um, tradition that's being practically revived now in the academy that I work with in Florence, and I started to work with years and years and years ago. And I was seeking to find those roots and find those traditional ways of painting that I could not find here in America when I went to art schools here. They were simply absent. So that void led me to the search and to my amazement, when I arrived in Florence, which was actually around Paschal time of that year, I and the Pascha was close or almost the same. I think it was that year that I arrived. I have to look it up on the calendar. You can check. It's in. I think it was 2008 or nine that I arrived. One of the first my trips there. That's when it kind of clicked for me. That I might be here for a different reason, and that's why I ended up meeting Father George, Georgi, as we call him in Russian, right near Baptisteria in Florence. Nothing to do with, it's not an active Baptisteria, but it's a very famous place that is standing right in the heart of Florence, where most of the very famous people, such as Michelangelo and others, were baptized, and all of the world kind of comes to see this structure right across from the Santa Maria Maggiore. That's where we met, at the doors of Baptisteria. It's kind of a mystical story, but we met with Father George right at the door. The Doors of Paradise, they're called, by Ghiberti, was the author. And we're not going to get into every artifact that I can mention here, but those are pretty beautiful, and it took him over 20 years to make. And Michelangelo actually called them the Doors of Paradise. That's where I met my father confessor, father who baptized me. At that time, I was a Soviet casualty, if you will. I wasn't baptized for reasons that at the time when I was growing up, my family was very protective, and there were consequences. And the church life in Russia in the 70s was almost null at the time. So I had no baptism. And I'm fortunate in that sense, because it was a conscious churching for me. But really, ironically, if you will, I ended up going to a Catholic country with no intention of becoming Catholic. Though I did have this interesting conversation short right there in front of the doors, and talking to Father George. And I said, well, I've come here and I'm looking, I said, I'm looking for, for my church, for Christ. I knew I was coming there for that reason. That's another story. I'm not going to go into that. But I really knew that at the moment. And I was just kind of ambiguous. I said, well, I'm in this country. All these Catholic churches are here. I know there's a Russian church here too. And he goes, what, are you going to pray in Latin? And I said, no. So that was pretty much my convergence argument that we had. I was very much not really like set into one or the other way. I was like kind of like a newborn in that moment. And then I went through catechesis and became very involved in the church almost immediately. It was like a burst of a new life. I was baptized in Florence into Orthodox faith in a very old and historic church that we'll talk about a little bit later, and we're going to visit it, God willing, this year on this trip. And
Well,
so my yeah.
well, a lot of people, yeah, that's a good point. A lot of people have asked, so are there any Orthodox churches at all in Italy? So I get that question, and I'm like, yeah, of course.
Oh.
So, and the one
Uh,
you're talking about is one of the best examples.
It is true. For Italy, it's one of the for the central Italy, and historically, it is truly a best example. Not to say there are some beautifully built. If we talk about practicing Orthodox, Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox, there's a huge number of Orthodox immigrants or workers that come, because it's right there at the border. It's like America and Mexico, there's that similar thing. There's a lot of gastarbeiters that come from Europe, Eastern Europe. Now there is a huge influx of immigrants and refugees as well from Ukraine. But numbers of Orthodox people in Italy are pretty large, and they all need to go to churches. So Catholics often give churches because of their crisis of faith in Europe that are pretty intense. They have 90% of their beautiful old churches. Some of them are even older than the schism, which is exactly about 1,000 years back. These churches just stand there vacant. So Catholic Church is being generous about that, I must say, and they can rent out a church, an old 13th century church or 17th century church or a convent or not a cathedral usually, but a church for like $10 a month just for the sake of it being used or taken care of, which is often the case or used to be the case. And then the community of Orthodox would serve, would occupy it and do regularly conduct services there. But the church in Florence is unique in the sense that it was built specifically as an Orthodox church. It was actually the idea came to build it came in late 1800s, and one of the like main sort of the royal family was involved very actively, and Russian nobility, yes,
Russian royal family. Okay.
Russian nobility, yes. The daughter of the emperor was Maria. She let me look up the year. I actually pulled it up. It's she had an idea to build the church in 1870s, and the project took some time to come to fruition. But initially, the money was collected. There was a very large group of Russian, not immigrants actually. It was very common for Russian nobility or even people of middle class to travel to Italy for summer. And we're talking about late 1800s, early 1900s. Dostoevsky spent several years actually in Italy, and he finished writing his famous work Idiot in Florence, overlooking Boboli Gardens, Palazzo Pitti. He had an apartment there. Tchaikovsky wrote The Queen of Spades one summer, and those are just the big names that we know of. But the royals felt there was an important gesture to build a church, and the project was undertaken. And actually, we are celebrating the 120 years of the consecration of the Church of Nativity that we're talking about here. The upper church is consecrated in the name of birth of Christ, of the Feast of Nativity, and the lower church, it's a two-level church, was consecrated in the name of Saint Nicholas, the wonder worker, in whose where I was baptized. And later on, talking about Providence, I was after my ordination as a priest, I was sent to serve in Saint Nicholas Church here in Florida, where I continually served for almost 10 years. And I couldn't think of any better way to confirm participation of a saint in my life. But regardless, this church is a very, very prominent landmark. In fact, it's in a UNESCO list. It has a very important historical role because at the time, relationships between Catholics and Orthodox were extremely heated And this was, I believe, the first church to be built on a public Italian land, not on a private property. The private property, you could do whatever you want, but people aren't going to come to to really attend a parish that's somewhere far away. They had no cars, so they actually built this church in Florence, and it's built in a very beautiful way. I will show the images of this church in this interview, and you will see where we're hoping to go and serve divine liturgy. And we actually ended up planning this trip and found out that the timing of this trip fell right on the 8th, around the period of the 120-year anniversary of this church being consecrated. So it's kind of wonderful to come in that cycle of the presence of Orthodoxy. But this is by no means the only church that was built in Nizza. There was another church that was built around the same time. There was this uprising of kind of presence of Orthodoxy that was beginning to start to be allowed due to the influence of Russian royal family and the relations between Italy and Russia were growing in a positive direction. So the churches were permitted to be built, and the communities of Orthodox were able to worship.
Interesting. So if we go back to the period of where you mentioned the heated and warming periods, the reason for the heated goes back to, for those that don't know, the Great Schism, and there were predecessors to the Great Schism already in the 800s and the 900s, time of Saint Photius, and that had to do with partly the Frankish power. The Franks were sending missionaries into Orthodox areas and were trying to evangelize people for the Filioque. And this came to a head. St. Photius has letters where he discusses this by the time of 1054 with the famous mutual excommunication of East and West. And then we get a period of about 200 years before there's councils that are definitive for both the East and the West. The Council of Lyons happens in the West in 1274, which is a definitive statement of the double hypostatic procession of the Filioque. And then we get the Council of Florence as an attempted reunion council a few centuries later, 1438, 1445. This actually moves from a couple cities. It's called the Council of Florence. But it's relevant for this discussion because it was an attempt at a union council, and the Medicis were involved in sort of organizing and trying to get people together and paying for some of the hotel rooms and this kind of stuff for bishops to come and to see. Now, this was a false union council, but it's important because we're beginning to see this resurgence in this area of the world of, Catholic Orthodox relations. And so there's a lot of history that's going to be really important for our pilgrimage that is really heavy at this time. And again, the Medicis are playing a key role here, not just in this famous attempt at union, but also their patrons at this time of the arts. They're very involved in civic life, very involved in politics, especially people like Cosimo de' Medici. So is there anything you want to get into the history with what surrounds the schism and all the way up to Ferrara,
yes.
Florence?
Well, just very kind of across to paint the picture. Yes, of course, this was an unprecedented event. This was a huge event. I wouldn't necessarily compare it to the First Ecumenical Council in its importance as far as theology, though it was close to being as important, probably with a negative consequence. But it was an attempt. The attempt was definitely done on both parts, but mainly the East was interested and moved to do this by the circumstances in which it was finding Constantinople was basically on the verge of being sieged, or could be. At the time it wasn't that bad, but very shortly after it all kind of came to what they were afraid of, and they were hoping for support from the West. But at the time, this was definitely public relations / theological event. But it was over 700 clergy members, but by some numbers that it was at least 2,000 people, clergy, bishops, and others that traveled from Constantinople with patriarch. And you can imagine that being done in 15th century, that type of, and as you mentioned, yes, the hotel rooms that are kind of an important topic in our situation here as we go to Florence or Italy in our pilgrimage. We're dealing with the same issues. We're not dealing with issues, luckily, because we don't have Medici as our sponsors, maybe fortunately, but we do have partners in Italy that work with us, that are Orthodox, that have been in Italy for decades, and have some of them have Italian roots, and they are helping us to really get the best possible places for accommodation for whatever price we have to pay. And this was obviously a huge investment. Of course, it was in the time of this unia, as they called, or this council. So I'm just kind of showing the magnitude of this. So they moved from Ferrara, which is another city, then eventually ended up in Florence. And then there was all kinds of bad things happening, including death of patriarch, which some think he might have been poisoned. Though those are speculations, but with Medici involved, you never know. But I think Medici had other interests too. They were very interested in the reception of cultural influences of the Byzantium, and you can imagine that this could be, this could be an export of artifacts and books that they could have been receiving, that they were very interested in. When you have 2,000 people coming from the East with they all learned people, right. They were very interested in that fusion. However, this fusion really kind of got augmented during the fall of Constantinople, where there were really people were now not just visiting, they were fleeing and trying to salvage again, books were a very, very important commodity. Price of a book, some of the books in the Medici library could run like as much as an expensive car, current economy, and more. So this is this was very valuable. There was exchange, but there was also obviously attempts to connect the East and West in a commercial sense, because Medici's were bankers, and their main form of influence, which is continued to this day as a mechanism of political influence, was banking, and they were extremely successful for that time period. So brilliant PR and political involvement on their part. However, if we talk about theology, we're talking about something very different, is where East was trying to cut corners in a way and basically succumb to kind of a compromise in the area of faith, which was very in some ways maybe kind of wishy-washy, and in some ways was maybe clear-cut heretical from the Orthodox perspective. Not maybe, that's the reason why all of the attempts to combine the incombinable things has fallen apart after the Unia was signed, but not by all. And of course, there we talk about the infamous Mark of Ephesus, who was the one bishop, which is not true. He was not the only one. There were, I believe, some Georgian bishops and maybe some Syrian ones, but there was a group of bishops that very, very minor, like 5. Mm-hmm. But it would be not fair to say that there was only one, because others were also, some were just would not sign it, and some really opposed it. But Mark of Ephesus was the one who really stood up and said, I'm not going to do this, and this isn't right. And basically that kind of put a wrench into this whole mechanism, but it was a spiritual more than political obstacle that wasn't overcome. And then the political situation kind of showed that the West is not really going to support this war with invaders. It wasn't really economically possible. They were hopeful in the East for that. But this history seems to maybe repeat itself in some ways. This relationship and attempts to bring in religious dimension and even dogmatic, which was really concerning at the time. And maybe you want to
Yeah,
say a
I
few
mean
words about that.
there's parallels to today. I mean there's a great book on this by it's an out of print, or excuse me, out of copyright. You can get a good copy of it. It's called The History of the Council of Florence by Ostromov, Russian author. And it's a really good book, kind of detailing it from the Orthodox perspective. And he goes into a lot of what Father Vladimir discussed, and he notes the geopolitical influences as well as the theological influences. So there's a lot of things, a lot of pieces to the puzzle, influencing what's happening there. And as Father Vladimir pointed out, one of the reasons Saint Mark of Ephesus is a saint is because he, took this stance, and he's one of the pillars of Orthodoxy along with Saint Photius. But regardless, the history here is very important. The Medici's played a key role. We want to talk about, I guess, the other places and other cities, the ones that you think are. I mean,
Yes.
there's several sites that we'll be going to, but what are some of the sites that stick out to you as is really relevant to discuss?
Yes. Well, I guess the most. I was just holding the cover of this book. I showed Jay, and yeah, and this is one of the Medici's, the very interesting book on portraits and politics from actually a little later period where the Constantinople fell from 1512 to 1570. This is a very nice analysis, and I do as we know, Jay, we've been working on a lot of art analysis, so I'm kind of interested in combining the art and philosophy and theology and understanding of these traditions. But that was just a little reference to the art in the portraiture. But yes, to move on from Medici, I guess every city and every city state, Italy did not exist as we understand it at all at the time. Just like there was no European Union at the time, Italy was pretty much a peninsula that had a lot of small, first feudal and then a little bit more influential city states, and some of them had a strong influence through the trade, the sea trade. Of course, Venetian Republic, which stands on its own, and it stood on its own for a very long time and had tremendous influence. And we're not going to get into it. I actually did not include Venice in this trip because, in my opinion, Venice deserves a very intense exploration by itself. So to have various cities, and I will talk about a little bit more of an obscure one that I made a background for my poster because it's a very beautiful place. It's Amalfi. Amalfians at the time were second to Venice at some points in their influence of the sea trade, and of course the warring of their navy, protecting the trades. All of those trades usually went through Constantinople. That's why we talk about the geopolitics and the trade and exchange and of goods and commerce. But Amalfi was a place where it became less influential over time. But what interests us, and that's one of our primary interests in Italy, the relics. So Amalfians needed to have, each of the little city states or larger city states needed to have their patron saint, their main attractor, protector, and kind of the primary persona that would be their protector. So Amalfians got a very large part of the relics of Saint Andrew, the apostle, the first call. At least that's their official claim. We have a lot of questions as far as like where the original relics are and which are the original relics. But most relics were divided in time, and so it's almost never that you have one particular relic in one place. However, we do run into some discrepancies where one saint could have 10 hands and five heads, and that has been used as an argument
Yeah.
by the Protestants
Right.
to and a period of enlightenment to say this is all ridiculous, and that generally has led to this kind of a total denouncement of relics, which would it's easy to find, it's easy to just kind of go black and white on things and say, no, we're just going to do away with this, but the truth is that we have tremendous evidence in the Old Testament, Book of Kings, and then the Acts of the Apostles, and so on. I'm not going to turn this conversation into apologetics, especially on the topic of relics, but this is one of our major sort of points of travel, because we're going to visit relics that are, some of them are relics that have nothing to do with Italy, and a lot of them aren't. Like Saint Andrew
Mm-hmm.
is not Italian. It's not a local saint veneration.
Mm-hmm.
However, there is that whole topic that's so dear and important to me that I can't help but say a couple of words. Being a Rokor priest, I have found later in my life as an Orthodox that Saint John Maximovich, of whom I knew something but didn't know enough, and didn't realize that he was a big advocate of veneration of the Western saints, the pre-schism saints. We are living in the West, and we have an incredible heritage of saints that have been completely disregarded and overlooked, and sometimes even viewed as, in some like conjunction, being Western, viewed as Catholic. And then they got the problems from after the schism period, where the schism began to say, oh, well, all of these old saints, they kind of associate with Orthodoxy. So let's not talk about them. Let's come up with our new brigade of saints that are going to reflect our new
Yeah.
frame, our new project, our new program. And so for the West, they were lost. Even for the Catholics, they became less and less important, and sometimes overshadowed completely. And in some ways for the Orthodox in the East, because they were in the East and these are Westerners, so who knows? And that basically led to this loss of 1,000 years of incredible wealth of sainthood that we cherish in Orthodox faith, but have lost the connection to the local. And I would say local as being in the West currently and living here for over 30 years. I definitely see myself as a kind of a person that has experienced both worlds. But in Italy, we are going to see, in this trip, we're going to see a majority of the saints that are Orthodox. Well, they're all going to be Orthodox, but they're not going to be primarily local as such in their focus. They will be sort of the big saints like the Apostle Andrew, and there we'll go to Amalfi Coast, and there we will venerate his relics. And I had amazing stories happen to many people, including myself, where by the prayers of by help of the intercession of the saints, amazing things do happen that we know are clearly not accidental or imaginary. They're in Protestantism, there's a lot of place for the personal testimony of my faith, my spiritual experience. People in Orthodoxy have that testimony embodied in the saints and have experience of saints clearly helping. It's not like I prayed to God, it didn't work, so now I need saints to help me. But something else happens is I do pray to God, and then a person comes to venerate relics of a certain saint and then receives help almost immediately, and that happens very often.
Mm-hmm.
That serves as a clear testimony of that experience of faith. I'm not trying to make a commercial here for going to have a wish fulfilling trip with all the things you want going to come true when you go to venerate relics, but I want to be clear that these testimonies do appear very often. That's why there is a process of veneration and collection of data that's being verified about saints' miraculous performance, so to speak, that goes on beyond time and space, and oftentimes is somehow manifest when a person makes an effort. When we go on a pilgrimage, where we make a journey into outside of our comfort zone. That has been experienced by many Christians over centuries, and even more than centuries. The journeys through pilgrimages have been one of the central spiritual practice of Christians, for literally beginning with the Apostle Paul, if you will, traveling like enormous distances throughout all of known empire at the time. So we could talk a little bit more about that spiritual meaning of of pilgrimage and its mystical, if you will, aspect,
Yeah.
which is very important, I think.
Yeah, I think so. The idea of, the Christian life is a journey. Even Protestants have this idea where you have, the famous literary works like John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. And John Bunyan, who was a Protestant Puritan guy, he was pulling on the idea of being a pilgrim, going on a pilgrimage that Christians did. And he turns it into an allegory for the Christian life of being tempted with despair, being tempted with despondency, the journey is these various temptations. And he's pulling from an older idea, though, of the pilgrimage, of a providential occurrence that occurs, like you said, with various relics or with icons and whatnot. But the pilgrimage itself is kind of an image of our own journey in the spiritual life, correct?
Yes, I think that it has it does reflect, I think, the nature, definitely the nature of our life. We are walking a path, and the path may be rocky, it may be curved, it may be a labyrinth-like, with a certain entrance and a certain exit point, not a maze with no entrance or exit. But to be clear, we do sometimes feel like we're walking away from that goal, as the road winds away from the place where we're supposed to be heading. We may feel like we turned our back on our destination, but in a mystical path, similar things happen. We get reoriented, but we're still walking towards that goal. And I think, in large, that of course that goal is God, and that journey is actually infinite. There is no real, from at least Orthodox perspective, attainment of God in its entirety, because God is not attainable for a human being in its totality. That we talk about, our journey is infinite because God is infinite, but closeness to Him grows, and something happens where God really just supports us as a loving father and as a parent. He encourages that journey, and as soon as you set out to walk towards Him, that beautiful synergy begins. And I think, pedagogically, in my experience, I think that's what our Creator does, where a Christian person sets out on a pilgrimage towards Him, towards the holy purpose. Things start to conspire in a way, and temptation may also occur. It just begins to crystallize into more of a clear sort of spiritual metaphor in our experience of a spiritual path. However, it may be very different for each person on that tour bus. Some people that come with us may be people who are not even Orthodox and may not even consider becoming Orthodox. Who knows? They may change their mind, and it's not like we have set out these goals. And by the way, I know we got a lot of questions. I know Jay has been getting questions, and I did too, as we're signing people up, that they're asking, do I have to be Orthodox to go on this trip? And my answer is, you absolutely do not have to be Orthodox to go on this trip. You will not be able to commune and the two communion services that we're planning, one of which is going to be, in God willing, in Florence on Sunday, and the other is going to be, which will take us to another location, very important location to many Orthodox people, is in Bari, where the relics of Saint Nicholas the wonder worker are. And I'll say a few words about Saint Nicholas when I finish this thought about the pilgrimage in general. But yes, you don't have to. You can't participate in divine liturgy. Doesn't mean you get kicked out. Don't worry. You get to be. You can be present. But main condition in my organizing this is that the person is generally interested in Orthodoxy, even if it's from historic perspective, and they are curious and they're respectful. Because otherwise, this trip is just going to be extremely boring and annoying to be part of, because it's going to be about stuff that you don't really care about.
Yeah.
Though we will include a lot of cultural layers of things, not just prehistory, but we will include, the things that happen after the schism. We will come to museums and other beautiful places that people built in Italy for the other 1,000 years. We're not going to call them, entirely heretical. It's still human genius and a lot of beautiful and selfless efforts to create beauty for the sake of something higher than themselves, for their idea of God and Christ. However, it might have taken shape is another question, no judgment implied, but we definitely will enjoy and experience many dimensions of Italy. It's not just going to be going to, things that happened 1,000 years prior. But with that said, anyone can be a part of this. And for some people, it could be a catechesis. For some people, it could be simply an experience. But for an Orthodox person, of whom we might have a majority of participants, I'm pretty sure at this stage, we definitely will experience a deeper relationship with our own journey, as Jay pointed out. As we walk the path, God comes in that synergistic way and blesses that effort. And to that, we attest through the history of the church. As people began to go to Holy Land, starting, very early on in Christian, first centuries of Christianity, people would go to Holy Land for pilgrimages, maybe even starting the first century. Some who could and some who traveled for various reasons would go to Golgotha. The secret Christians are Christians, and they would already begin to venerate those places and be in touch with those communities there. But this continued on and then further led to other things like crusades and so on, and other historic situations. But traveling to Holy Land would oftentimes, most of the time, would be taking the pilgrim through Italy. So actually that road to Holy Land would go through all these places, or a lot of those places where the pilgrims would go for literally for thousands of years, walking certain paths and stopping at certain sites and continuing on their journey, then take off on the boats from the shore, just like Amalfi. They would then travel to the lands, the Holy Land in the east. So we're not doing anything new, except we're not going to Jerusalem on this trip, but we're trying to cover the Italian part.
And yeah, and of course Christianity, went to Rome early, right? I mean, Paul goes to Rome, so Peter ends up in Rome. So we know that it's it's the earliest bishopric that's doubly apostolic, as Saint Irenaeus says, because of Peter and Paul being there. So a lot of things that are central to Christianity, obviously in Rome. Are there other locations, a couple more that you wanted to mention? I think you have about, what is it, 10 or so?
Well, we talk about 10 major cities
Right.
and places where that we're going to travel to and from are more. And
Okay.
of course, within them, I mean, should you
Many
mention
places within
Rome?
the city. Yeah.
Yeah, within the cities, Rome will be a place that we will spend about 4 days in. We have guided tours, bus tours through Rome. It's not a bus tour through Rome where you just sit in a bus and you look out of the window. It's very helpful, and Rome is definitely the one of these centers of Christian world
Right.
culture, and not just Christian, but of course the Roman Empire. Prior to that, left some amazing artifacts and historical things. Some, of course, are reflecting the periods of persecutions of Christians, and generally it's just soaked in history and blood of martyrs as well. And you can really feel those things if you come in with that spiritual intention. You begin to enter these spiritual realities in a very different way. It's almost like a parallel world. I mean, I've done pilgrimages for years, and conducted pilgrimages for years, living in Italy for many years, and also then doing groups coming from here, from America and the West to Italy. And I can say the experience is, it's always a mystical one. You always feel you parallel reality. You're seeing all those, scooters and Italians and beautiful scenery and things like that that seem to be very much part of that culture and country that I really love. But at the same time, you find yourself in a very different realm as well, because your intention is different and the blessing is different, and it gives you a whole new perspective on faith. It's hard to explain in words. You have to participate, you have to walk. I mean, I can describe this road to you, but once you walk it, you will experience it in your own unique way, unique to you. But Rome is grand, and I will not stop talking about this if you don't stop me. So we're not going to talk about Rome, because Rome is just, we're going to have enough
Yeah.
time to just kind of touch main points of Rome. And that will be, God willing, extra days that we did it on purpose because it's enormous. But other places that may be known a little less, well, let's say a few words about the neighboring city to Amalfi, which is in that southern part of Italy that is very central to our journey, is the body where relics of Saint Nicholas are kept. And everybody knows who Saint Nicholas is. He is the saint that has made it to the label of the Coca-Cola bottle. So he's the probably most pop cultural symbol, other than whatever they try to exploit. But somehow Saint Nicholas is the reason for the season. He's become the god of materialistic reality, and the skewed focus of Christianity on the birth and materialization of Christ, which is kind of augmented by this, period of nativity or Christmas time, where everybody turns it into a commercial event. So no wonder, because his days, his name is his feast is celebrated right around the time in our church calendar, not the new calendar. And we're going to get it to the calendar. We're going to spend another hour, but at least his feast day is on the 19th of December, so it's right by the nativity celebration in the new calendar Christian world. But he's been around since 345, and he has been venerated by many Christians, and it's kind of an amazing, phenomenal saint, because there are so many saints, but somehow Saint Nicholas just is so known in the Christian world. And we look at his life in detail. We understand that he was really, he was a bishop, but he was also a very meek person, as far as we know, very selfless, entirely giving, which could be a description of many saints. He sort of is like this universal image of a saint in some way, an archetypal saint, if you will. He's also an archetypal saint who attended the first Nicene Council and
Well,
refuted Arian
well,
heresy.
yeah. One brief instance in my own life, when I was received into Orthodoxy, it was at an Antiochian church that just happened to be called Saint Nicholas. That Christmas, somebody bought me a nice Saint Nicholas icon. When I came down to Florida for the first time, I found you at Saint Nicholas, and the relics of Saint Nicholas were there. And
Yes.
now the yeah, good.
And now we're going to
Yeah,
Bari, to a place where a large part of his relics are. And exactly, this is like one of those repetitive, confirmative events that lead to understand. Like I said, I was baptized at St. Nicholas Church, and then ended up serving in one, without like looking to, to go
yeah.
there specifically, and ended up in Bari, in the place where we were going, exactly a week after my baptism took place, and that wasn't planned either. So I clearly felt that what we understand is this concept of a patron saint.
Hmm.
So that's exactly what it means. It's like heaven gives you a patron. It's not like you really choose one. Sometimes you may be drawn to a saint, like you read his life and you feel such a great affinity for a certain
Yeah.
saint, and it's like this love that you feel. And very often it could be most often, and probably always, I would say, is mutual, because I mean saints do love all of us. But
Hmm.
there is sometimes a personal relationship, and it's like a mentor in heaven. I don't know specifically why, but God knows how these mentorship patronages do occur, and the signs, I believe, very clearly, and makes it clear to us that this is the saint that is going to help you, and you start building this really a personal relationship with him. It's very important not to allow it to overshadow your relationship with Christ. And nobody says that, just because you have an uncle, you shouldn't love your father. It's kind of a very, again, maximalist idea.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into it, but that's just to say that, we have these testimonies like yours, and I actually didn't remember that. I can use one more that leads us to another place. Actually, we will see relics of Saint George some along the way, because they're very famous. But I was baptized by a priest by name George, and then I was ordained by a bishop named George in Saint George Church.
Oh wow.
Again, there, he's currently a bishop of Australia, Roquefort Bishop George. I love very much, of course, because I was born in to priesthood through his ordination, and through my ordination. So speaking about my ordination, that is another. So there's the triple George sort of confirmation from God, and all of that is given to us so that we are certain. It's a mercy of God to give us certainty that we're on the right path. You see
Hmm.
a sign, you see another sign, and Christ warns us, says you shouldn't seek signs, because then it becomes this obsessive kind of
Superstition. It becomes
craze,
superstitious. Yeah.
superstition, and you fall into traps, because
Yeah.
you can start reading signs everywhere, and then you're lost completely, because you
Yeah.
start making your own interpretations. So there's a fine line between getting obsessed about these things and actually still seeing undeniable evidence of God's participation in that kind of, you would say, orthodox way of experiencing your Christian path. Orthodox meaning unchanged and confirmed by the saints. So that leads me to our next one of our destinations. We got to go right from Bari, and I did want to speak more about Bari and Saint Nicholas, and we will serve the, God willing, divine liturgy on his relics that still are on Italian territory. They were salvaged by Italians. As a question where some say they Italians or Barians at the time. There was no Italians. Okay, there was Amalfians, there were Barians, there were Florentines, there were Romans. So Italy was all over. It was these. There was we talked about Venetian Republic and so on, the Florentine Republic. So anyway, but they got Saint Nicholas there. So Amalfians got Saint Andrew. Barians got Saint Nicholas. They took him from actually the Emira, where his relics were, and at the time it was being invaded by Muslims already. So they felt that they actually were salvaging them, and they did in a way, because later on this territory, they currently are Turkey, they still cannot build a little church in a place where the relics were. There are ruins of it that are kind of kept intact, but they won't allow them to serve there or have a restoration of the church. But that's not important. The important is the thing is that his relics are intact, and they have been preserved in the Basilica in Bari, where God willing we will be serving on Thursday, which is a day that all of Orthodox Church remembers Saint Nicholas on every Thursday in a cycle of the services of all the Orthodox churches. That's how important symbolically as a saint, a representative of all the saints, is the role of Saint Nicholas in the Orthodox perception. However, it doesn't mean that he is the most important saint. He's, like I said, the most perhaps known saint in many Christian cultures, but that doesn't make any other saint less potent or effective. Again, we have to be careful about these things, but he is very beloved, and we are fortunate if we get to be there. And from there, I want to take us to north of Italy, right over to Milan, where we have relics of Saint Ambrose of Milan, and
So we're not
other
going
two
to
saints.
the runway, the fashion runway of Milan.
Mm.
I'm joking.
Exactly. That's exactly the thing, is the point about the parallel realities, because most of the time people come to a place and they end up swooped into this worldly
Yeah.
dimension, where it's like, if you go to Milan, you got to go to buy clothes, you got to go look fashionable and find fashionable things, and if you go as a pilgrim, you realize that there are these incredible connections to world history and culture that are just, you may be stepping over, going to your next shopping destination or even a museum. And you might walk by St. Ambrose Basilica, where
Mm.
relics of St. Ambrose is. And
Yeah.
this personality is extremely influential, historic, not just in Orthodox world, but he was, you could say, the main reason for conversion, other
Of
than
St.
Christ's
Augustine.
calling, of course. Yes, and of course the Holy Spirit, but yes, conversion of St. Augustine, who was witness to St. Ambrose, spiritual commentary on the Bible, and also his philosophical and theological knowledge that was probably, he was one of the main genius theologians of the times, that again, God by his providence led this other genius, future genius theologian, who at the time was not at all a Christian, who was inspired and finally met someone that he could understand and be inspired by and
Yeah.
respect, because maybe before that he did not encounter the same apologetic or the same way of holy life, because St. Ambrose combined being a lawyer, and at the time being a lawyer, they both were lawyers. Of course, it meant slightly different things. It meant highest level of education. It meant understanding of rhetoric, philosophy, and theology for Ambrose. And Augustine really was moved. And I think that was a very, well, not just me, but I think a lot of people know that that was one of the primary reasons. However, we wouldn't want to undermine things like prayers of his Holy Mother, Monica, who
Monica.
he dedicates several chapters in his book, Confessions, that's so moving and beautiful. And on one level you have prayer. I believe that was words of Saint Ambrose, or one of the priests that Monica was going to, where he said, "The son of such tears can never be lost to hell." I guess that's implied, because she was crying and praying for him daily to find Christ, and that's the reassurance she's got. So on one level, it's this realities of Orthodox, and these are Orthodox saints, though they were Latin, and they've influenced. That's why I'm saying Ambrose influences Saint Augustine, and then Saint Augustine really influences world culture
Yeah.
for up until today, is one of the major thinkers and probably theologians and personalities in human history. And it starts with a very important person at the time, who still is highly venerated in Orthodox Church in the East, and even we even sing some of his hymns in our regular services. In fact, today I'm going to be serving somebody a request that we do this gratitude service that sometimes people do in Orthodox Church, where they receive something that they've been praying for from God, and it's a very good practice to thank God and not just be like, all right, great, I got it, let's go. It's kind of like when we sit down and eat afterwards. It's a good idea not just to bless our food, but when we get up, is to say thank you, to remember that all of this comes from Him and through Him. And so, in that service of giving thanks, which is not like a big liturgy, it's a smaller private service for people who thank God. There's a whole hymn of exaltation to God that's written by Saint Ambrose. That's beautifully composed, and there's a mass that Catholics still preserve that is maintaining that sort of original format, which is very rare and is very rarely served. I believe in Milan they try to do it in Latin sometimes, where they still do the Mass of Saint Ambrose of Milan, which he used to serve at the time, which is now is completely, it's we're not going to talk about liturgics of Catholic differences between the Orthodox and Catholic, but these original services still remain. And so Ambrose's influences are very profound. But there's another story, and if you saw that, you probably saw the video that we did, this advertisement video that you actually see relics in one of the shots that kind of look kind of intense, like you can see the whole body.
Yeah.
That's the body of Saint Ambrose of Milan, and
Okay.
he's placed between these two other bodies. And the story of the relics that I find extremely fascinating, to me at least personally, is that, well, Ambrose of Milan was praying. He was a very ascetic person. He would sometimes fast for days and remain in prayer all night. He had an apparition of these two saints that they were twins, and they presented themselves, and they basically, there's a whole account where they told him where their relics are, and he needed to uncover them. But he actually had some doubts. He thought they was so vivid that he thought he might be hallucinating. And so he actually doubted it, and he had a reapparition until they insisted that he should do. And when they dug up the relics, they found these bodies intact with remains of their martyrdom. And Saint Ambrose has witnessed openly to that. And it was at the time when he was being persecuted, and the Orthodox Church was being persecuted by the Empress Justinia, who was Arian. And when the saints appeared or resurfaced, if you will, they all saw that as a message of divine intervention, providence, and support. And they knew who they were. They were martyrs of the first century, Gevrasius and Protasius, who were also twins. They were really twins in life, and they were saints that, by some account, they believe they were saints of the first century of the Nero period, and some say they might have been a slightly later period, but they identified them eventually. And Saint Ambrose spoken openly about it at the time when their community in Milan was struggling with severe persecutions from the Arians, and he put up a stand, and there were people who were being martyred by Christians, quote, to other Christians who were being martyred for their faith, for their profession of orthodoxy. And we're not going to get too deep into Arian heresy, but this is what we have today in Jehovah's Witnesses. Basically, if you want to look into Jehovah's Witnesses, just look into Arian heresy, and you'll find out what this is about. But Saint Ambrose witnessed to that, and Saint Augustine was a witness to his witnessing before he actually became converted, and he accounts that in his confessions and his sermons. So when Saint Ambrose found these two, as he would perceive them as his guardian angels, he said that he wants to be buried between them. And that's what his wish was fulfilled. That's why we have him laying there between these two martyrs of the earlier centuries. That again, we have these great influential minds that some of them even led to influence some of the Protestant thought, like St. Augustine, who are all witnessing to the amazing involvement of the saints in the lives of Christians, and that they, this testimonies sometimes get overlooked, which is sad. So we're trying to revive that awareness. In fact, the West, after the Vatican II, started to shy away from any veneration, trying to, the aggiornamento, trying to look like Protestants, the Protestantization of the church led to this kind of like we're not with them. We don't have any relics. We're not weird. They're still keeping them in certain places, prominent places, as a sort of reference to history. But local church-going Catholics, of which there are a minimal amount left, are all, they're not really venerating relics anymore. They don't understand what it means to come to the relics of the saint, to make that meeting, to have that connection, to have that conversation. And yes, go ahead. Sorry,
well, I was going to say we've been going for about an hour, and I was going to get you to say, I'm really looking forward to it. I'll be there. It's my first official real religious pilgrimage. I mean, I've been to shrines and places before, but not a pilgrimage of this nature. So Jamie and I will be there. We're looking forward to it. What do you think what would you say to people who are questioning? I mean, they need to go ahead and get their sign up now while before the deadline, which is coming up pretty soon. Yeah. So what do you want to tell people? Like, why do they need to do this?
Well, yes, I will tell people why do they need to do this. I will finish my story in a few sentences. The reason why I brought up this personal connection to, we talked about Saint Nicholas, Saint George. Right before I left Italy to be going to America to be ordained, I was already assigned to be ordained by Metropolitan Hilarion, first hierarch of the Russian Church abroad, who passed away just recently, who was a spiritual father and the heart of Rokor to all of us, and we still feel he was a man of holy qualities that we see in the saints. We love him so much, and his blessing was upon me already, and I went to say goodbye to saints of Italy. I didn't know when I was going to come back, how things are going to work out. So I actually went to Milan because I really love St. Augustine. And I wanted to venerate places where he went, and I wanted to venerate relics of St. Ambrose, whom I didn't. And that's where I found out more about St. Gebrasius and Protasius. And then literally a week after that, I left. And lo and behold, I was ordained on the day of St. Gebrasius and Protasius in St. George Church that I already mentioned. So here's another reason why you should sign up, because miracles do happen. But generally, it's going to be an amazing journey, a rich journey that's going to be filled with cultural and spiritual gifts. Yeah. In fact, Jay and I will hopefully do several lectures throughout our stay in Italy on different topics, including classical art and geometric analysis of classical art that I work with the Academy in Florence, where I am a professor of art history, and I work on these research projects that involve Renaissance art and later classical periods with geometry involved. Jay will probably speak on other topics related to philosophy and theology. We're talking about doing some collaboration on the School of Athens, the art work of Raphael that is in Vatican Museum, that is kind of an interesting visual map of philosophy that we're going to try to analyze from different points, right? That is something that Jay can probably talk about more as far as philosophical elements of art and culture that did have a lot to do with Italy. But talking about practical side of things and going to Italy with us, I will say, trying to be, as humble as we can be, through experience with these pilgrimages, I have made a decision to try to make this trip available to us, at the highest quality, at the lowest price that can be done at this quality. So as you register, you have to pay attention to the fact that we're going to be staying in four-star hotels, which gives us a very good guarantee that there's not going to be any surprises upon the way. We also went out of our way to get places that are in the center of cities like Rome, like Florence. That can affect your experience very much. From my experience of living there, you could be living in a suburb of a big city, staying in some motel, two-star motel, and that would be called, your Florence visit. Or you could be in a center historical part of Florence, in a nice historical hotel, experiencing these things, which will kind of give you, of course, as a pilgrim, you should be humble. We're not trying to make this into luxury trip, a yacht trip. If you want that, you can sign up for that too. We will make it happen if you like. But this is a little different. But we wanted to find that fine balance between quality, cultural accessibility, predictability of where we're going to end up, and just make it a memorable experience for everyone on every level possible. And so people are signing up quite actively, and we are currently nearing what is a deadline. Why is it so early? We are still in beginning of summer, because for us to be able to hold a group of rooms in hotels across Italy, we cannot just do it by simply promising them we're coming. We need to make deposits, so that they will hold these, and the buses we're going to be traveling on one nice tour bus together from place to place. So the transit, of course, is included throughout Italy. We will be moving from place to place. We will be having guides that will locally take us with special permits. We will have, like I said, bus tour of Rome, which allows us to stop in different places in the city, come out, so we don't have to, walk 20-mile perimeter in one day and fall over. That is okay to walk, and it's very spiritually rewarding. But if you want to cover a large territory in a short period of time, which we do, we try to make this as balanced and as efficient as it possibly can be. So this is part of the organizing that goes into it, and we try to remain in a compatible price range. In fact, secular tourist tours at this price only offer half of the program. I'm not even talking about the spiritual or intellectual content that we're going to be providing, but I'm just talking about, like, you get 5 cities in 9 days or 7 days, and not always you even know what hotels you're going to be getting into. We're opening up to you the places you can check where you're going to be going. People that somewhat you probably know Jay for a long time, if you're finding out about this through Jay, that will be talking about this culture and presenting certain ideas. And we're hoping that this will be an enlightening experience too, which cannot be priced whatsoever, but it will be priceless. I can promise that. God willing, everything works out. So yes, do sign up. Yes, do it. If you can help us make it happen, you will do it on time, not in November when times rolls up and you show up at the very last moment. We'll hope that this trip will be filled within next week or two. So we're hoping that you will be signing up. We will work on moving the deadline if we have to slightly, just to accommodate everyone, but you do need to at least contact us and let us know
But they
that
should
you
reach
are
out. Yeah,
serious.
they should reach out to you at the website there, nikatravelers.com, and the form that's the English form there, right?
Yes, correct. The site is available in both languages. You go to nikatravelers.com, you press the English button, and in fact, most of the people that have signed up so far are English speakers or American or Europeans. They are we have some Russian speakers that do speak English. So we will we have some very interesting art historian that will join us in Italy, who will give us some tours, and he's an author. And until he's further confirmed, I will not name him, but it's very likely. So I will do the parallel translation of anything that does come in as content in Russian that will be available. So everybody will receive the maximum information. Registration does, there's a registration form that you need to fill out simply and send it to me. If you have problem, you can email me. The email is listed everywhere, and I will communicate with you. I want to make it clear that registration is a first part of your payment, so you don't have to come up with the entire amount, and the amount of our the cost will vary based on how many people sign up. So we will hope that more of us sign up. There's a limit. We're not going to get another bus, that's for sure. So there's a limit to how many people can get on the bus, and that's under 50 people. And that's that's our limit. So we hope that people do join us, and more people get to experience it, the better. That's our prayer and hope.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much.
You are very welcome. I'm very excited. I'm very excited to share it with you, and every person that ever went on the trips before. I've never met a single person who regretted it or had even a bad experience, to be honest. If God wills everything in the world, we pray remains intact, we will be joining. But if for some reason, some orphans, people are worried these days that something unforeseen happens, we will definitely not, leave you stranded. We will do everything to reimburse you the best way we can. So don't be afraid that this is a non-refundable situation. But we're hoping everything will go well this fall, and we will travel through Italy like millions and millions of people do. In fact, Italy has become #1 destination for Americans this year. Rome is the most visited city by Americans. That's actually why we moved our trip to November, so that there's less
Yeah,
tourists,
right.
and that the prices are slightly better, and it won't be as hot. So we will travel hopefully with comfort, and with less crowds, and have more of a private experience with this spiritual reality that we're hoping to that God will grant us, and we'll get to experience.
All
God
right.
bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Father.